Welcome to Tentative Title with Tim. This is a podcast about creativity, about process, about filmmaking, and about screenwriting. Welcome, everybody, back to the podcast. So today's topic, I wanted to, reflect what number episode it is, which is episode 66. And I thought, this would be a good episode to talk about road trip movies. Because, the famous song, Get Your Kicks on Route 66. I thought it was cute. I thought it was fitting. So yeah, let's talk about road trip movies. Now, I was the kind of kid that really loved being in the car and going on road trips. I know I was probably like the weird one, but there was something about hopping in the car, especially like early in the morning. My parents would get me up, we would have donuts. We would just get on the road really early. I would nap in the car, obviously. But then once I was awake and kind of being able to look at the landscape around me, I loved being out on the road. I loved watching, all the towns we would go through, all the different sites that we would stop at, all the places we would go to eat. Like, there was, in a way, kind of like this, I wouldn't want to say a spiritual, but it was kind of like a spiritual process of starting at one place and then being someone kind of different by the time we got to our destination. Like, it felt like I was growing as I was seeing the different towns we were going through, and as we were stopping at different places to eat, as I was kind of, being able to kind of think about my life, even though at that time, there wasn't much to it. I was like, I'm a kid. But just being able to kind of see the world as it was unfolding in front of me was just magic to me. And that translated over into my love of road trip movies. Case in point, there was Trains, Planes, and Automobiles. Now, granted, that's a Thanksgiving movie, but it's still a road trip movie. He's trying to get home to his family. Steve Martin is trying to get home to his family, and he's coming through so many obstacles trying to do that. Also, I guess, there was also Vacation, which was, the comedy spin on the road trip movie, but it still packed that truth about, everything that can go wrong when you go on a family road trip, when you're trying to go someplace that's supposed to be fun, but the road to get there is just riddled with so many problems. And sometimes it felt that way, I don't think I've ever been on a road trip where it was completely a smooth sailing. There were always problems. There were always things that came up. Either it was with the car, or if it was the place that we stopped at didn't have everything that I thought it would. There were a couple times when it was oh, hey, this hotel we're going to has a pool, and then you get there and the pool is closed, or it just has it's not they didn't do all the necessary upkeep that they needed to. And so my parents are like, nah, you're not swimming in that. So, stuff like that. But with these movies, they kind of encapsulated what I felt being on a road trip, which was there was usually conflict. Not to say that there was conflict on every road trip, but I'm saying the conflict itself was you're trying to get somewhere, and there are so many obstacles to get to that goal. And obviously with the road trip movie, it's heightened. There's usually two characters who don't get along, or they're kind of forced to be in a car together because they're trying to get to the same place, or they need to get somewhere by a certain time because something is going to happen. And, there's like all these different scenarios that a screenwriter can come up with and a filmmaker can come up with to throw two characters into a car together and give them a deadline and then let the two characters clash. Like, it's so much fun watching that happen. And more often than not, like, the road trip movie is more of a character study than anything. Like, you have one character who's a certain way, and you have another character that's another way, and then instead of letting them go off and do their own thing, you kind of force them together into the situation and see how it plays out. It's like that's actually quite exciting when it comes to a creative point of view, to allow characters to kind of live and breathe their points of view, and not having any place to run if that relationship, if they're not able to kind of back up their argument about it. And that's only part of the road trip movie. That's like kind of the internal conflict of the two main characters, or depending on how many characters you have, like that's the main conflict that happens internally. But then you have the external conflict, which is the world around them that is compromising their goals, or is like, it could be something as simple as like, well, somebody forgot to put gas in the car, or they get a flat tire, or the transmission goes out, or their car gets stolen, or like any number of obstacles can be thrown in the way of these characters. And that's what makes these films a lot of fun too, because as an audience member, you're watching, you know what's going to happen. Like, you know that these characters are going to have conflict. You're not quite sure when or what is going to set them off, but you just know, because it's a buddy. It's basically like a buddy movie, essentially. But then when you see them have to deal with the setbacks of what's being thrown at them, in a way, it's like, it's exciting to see them react to that and see how they can pivot, and how they can find a way around it, and find a way to just keep going forward. Because the overarching goal, the goal that as an audience member we know that we want them to achieve by the end of the movie, we want them to get that. We want to see, but we want to see how they can earn it, because that's a lot of it as well. Like in the road trip movie, like they earn the goal at the end. Hopefully it's for something that they really want, that they end up getting. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes over the course of the journey of the movie, they realize that the reason why they're on this trip is because of something that maybe they didn't want in the first place, or that goal changes over time. But being able to see how these characters are changed through just one trip, I can relate. I mean, I feel like every single time I go on a trip somewhere, that I always come back changed in one way or another. Like just the fact of being outside of my usual day-to-day, having to just go on vacation somewhere. Like, I always come back with a different perspective. I always come back with feeling like I'd grown in one way or another. Even if it was just like something very, like, even if it wasn't that big of a trip, I always feel like some part of me got to experience life in a way that kind of changed my perspective in one way or another. And so I had heard that the road trip movie was dead. Like, people don't want to see them anymore. And I don't know if that's true. If there's a good movie and it's a road trip movie, I'll watch it. If it has actors that I enjoy watching, I'll watch it. But maybe the market isn't really, itching to have another road trip movie because of the fact that maybe there was just so much oversaturation at a certain point where, it's just like, okay, it's two guys in a car. This is extremely boring. Whatever. We've seen this a billion times. And yeah, I'll give them credit for that, for making that point. But I still think that there's a way in which you can still have that genre of movie and bring it back to it being fun, bring it back to it like being an adventure, and because like these movies don't have to be dramatic. They can be like an action movie or something. And like Midnight Run was like a movie that came out like years ago, but it's like it's two guys like being chased across country, and it's so much fun because the characters are nitpicking at each other, and they're constantly like like they're at odds, but then they begin to respect each other on a certain level. And so that's fun to watch because especially if you get some good actors. Like the whole concept of the road trip movie is just like, oh well, that's just the vehicle. Like you're there to watch great actors kind of one up each other, or to like to have these great moments where they can take a character from point A to point B, and you can see that growing of that character, that the character changing over time. And that's fun to watch, especially if you have a great actor who can show those different levels, who can, you can see the change in them happening, so that by the time you get to the end, you're like, oh, wow, this feels like a completely different character because of how much they've grown. Like who they were at the beginning of the film is completely different from where they are now at the end of the film. And I think for me, that's the appeal of the road trip movie, is being able to very straightforwardly have characters change, because going on a journey means you have to change. And if characters don't do that during the course of this movie, then it's just a very boring road trip. And that can't happen because it's boring. Nobody wants to see, two guys or two girls or guy and a girl in a car, for an hour and a half and not have anything happen. Like there has to be things that happen. There has to be upsets. There has to be ways in which the characters are challenged from who they are, from the other characters in the car, but also from the outside world. Like it has to happen. And putting it in the context of this genre is a very fun way that you can do that. And I hope that this genre doesn't go away, or at least I have faith in cycles, in how a genre that seems to be dead will suddenly be revived because somebody takes it and does something really interesting with it, or there's a certain amount of time where people just miss that kind of genre, and so they start watching the old stuff, or they start they start telling the studios basically with with what they buy, oh hey, they really love road trip movies now because the trains, planes, and automobiles and vacation are like through the roof in terms of sales. All right, let's start making some more road trip movies. So I have faith that we're gonna kind of come back to these films being big again, especially because of the fact that like we've been in lockdown for for 2020. Like people want to get out and do things, and some people are, but like having movies that are like wide open, that show like the landscape, that show different towns and different characters, I think is more needed now than ever. So I don't know, maybe I'm weird when it comes to my opinion on the road trip movie, but I really really like would love to see more of them come out, and to, you know, just to have this genre kind of like still being something that people are interested in, because I think it gets down to the humanity of just going on an adventure, even if it's something that is forced upon you, or if it's something that is, you know, you're trying to get somewhere. You know, it's just like it's a part of everybody's life. We are always traveling somewhere at one time or another, and to be able to kind of like watch a film about that experience, and especially when it goes wrong, is something very, very relatable. And the fact that you know, people are tired of watching them, like I don't know if that's the case. I really hope not. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for listening. I hope I've given you a little food for thought. If you really love you know, road trip movies, like, drop me a line, let me know. Let me know which ones, because maybe I haven't checked it out, and I would love to check it out. And speaking of journeys, I'd like to give a shout out to the Sacred Donut podcast. If you guys get a chance, go on over to Spotify and give them a listen. It's a podcast about like spirituality and thinking of things on a higher plane. Some really interesting stuff. And you know, they're supporting this podcast, so I want to make sure that I give a shout out to them, because they're doing some really great work over there. So go on over and give them a listen, give them a like, give them a review, all that kind of stuff. I'd really appreciate it. I'm sure they would really appreciate it. So all right, guys, this is all I got for today, and I'll talk to you on the next one. And also, if you want to connect with me, I have an email for the podcast. It's tentative.title.with.tim.podcast@gmail.com. Also, I have a Twitter account for the podcast where I post episodes, and that is @title_Tim. And you can find also on the Facebook page, I have a page for the podcast, so you can connect with me there. Looking forward to hearing from all of you, and until then, I'll catch you on the next one.